You clicked a story about Viking widows, but not the ones you hear in sagas. This follows one woman who lost her husband before winter set in. Her grief lasted one night. Her fight lasted far longer. She stood alone in a hall built for two. She hunted in forests where wolves tracked her steps. She guarded livestock from men who waited for her weakness. She cut wood until her hands bled. She slept in a corner of the longhouse with one ear open for danger. Viking widows lived lives you wouldn't survive for a week, and this widow's life shows why. Her tribe respected her strength, yet no one shared her burden. No one carried her grief. Each dawn tested her. Each night hardened her, and each choice she made shaped the fate of her land. You meet her on the morning after she buried her husband. Snow covers the grave. Cold pushes into her chest with each breath. She stands alone before the longhouse door with work stacked around her like a wall. No tribe member steps forward to help. No voice speaks comfort. She keeps moving because the land waits for no grief. She gathers wood. She checks animals. She repairs broken tools with hands still stiff from night frost. Viking widows lived lives you wouldn't survive for a week. Her life shows why. Here, sorrow does not stop hunger. Loss does not stop storms. And danger follows every step a woman walks alone. Before you settle into her story, slow your breath. Let your shoulders drop. Let the day fall off you like loose snow from a cloak. Tell me where you watch from tonight. Warm your hands. Pull a blanket closer. Dim the lights or sit near a soft glow. This channel moves with quiet steps, and each story grows stronger when you enter it calm. If you enjoy these Viking nights, a soft like or a gentle tap to subscribe helps the stories reach more listeners. Share a comment if you want more tales about the hidden lives inside longhouses. Now breathe again, slow. Ease into the hall where she stands alone. Her winter waits for you. Snow covered the ground in a thick, heavy sheet on the morning she stepped out of the longhouse alone. The wind pressed against her face and stung her eyes. She lifted her cloak with one hand and held it tight around her neck. Frost clung to the wool. The sky held no sun. Only a thin gray light spread across the valley. Herd animals huddled near the fence. Smoke drifted from a few nearby halls, but no one opened a door. No one greeted her. No one offered help. She stood in the doorway for a long time without speaking. Her breath formed small clouds that rose and broke apart. Inside the hall, the fire burned low. The woodpile sat thin. A broken rake leaned against the wall. A cracked water bucket rested near the door. Every part of the place held her husband's touch. But he lay in frozen earth now. She had covered the grave with stones the night before. Her hands still hurt from lifting them. She stepped forward and pushed through snow that reached her knees, her boots soaked through fast. The cold bit her ankles. She tightened her jaw and started her first round of the day. She walked along the fence and checked for weak spots. Frost split the top beam. A wolf could slip through if it tried hard enough. She pressed her palm to the wood. It felt thin. She needed to fix it, but she had no spare logs yet. She kept walking. Her breath shook. The animals grunted as she approached. They smelled her grief. They sensed her silence. She rubbed one goat's head. It leaned into her hand and cried soft. She looked over the herd. She counted them twice. None lost. That gave her a small bit of strength. She turned back toward the longhouse and saw a man watching from far off. He stood near a tree with arms crossed. He said nothing. He lowered his gaze when she noticed him. He turned away. He walked back toward his own hall without a single word. She expected that. Widows in winter made people turn quiet. Some feared misfortune. Some feared spirits around the dead. Some feared the sight of a woman forced to stand alone. No one wanted to feel their own weakness. They looked away from hers. She moved to the woodpile. Only a few logs sat there. She needed 2 days' worth at least, or the fire would die by nightfall. She grabbed the axe. The handle still held marks from her husband's hands. She held it too tight without meaning to. She walked to the far edge of her land. Snow rose in high drifts. She stopped near a cluster of trees. She picked a trunk thin enough to cut with her strength. She stepped back. She planted her boots firm. She raised the axe. The first swing missed center and scraped the bark. She stepped back again and struck harder. The axe sank into the trunk. Wood splintered. She pulled the blade free. Her shoulders ached. Her breath grew fast. She struck again and again until the tree leaned. Snow fell from its branches in a thick shower. The final swing cracked the trunk fully. The tree fell on its side with a heavy sound that echoed through the valley. She stared at the fallen trunk for a moment with her breath shaking. She dropped to one knee. The cold pressed through her clothes. Her stomach tightened. She held the axe with both hands and steadied her breath. A widow still carried every task of 2 people. She carried the farm. She carried the hall. She carried the winter. She carried her grief. No one in the tribe stepped in unless she failed. If she broke, then they helped. But if she stood, even in pain, they left her to it. Survival shaped the rules. Every hand had its own work. Every haul had its own weight. Her haul now rested on her shoulders alone. She rose again. She chopped the fallen trunk into pieces. The axe grew heavy. Her breath grew sharp. Snow clung to her hair. Frost formed on her lashes. She kept going. She needed enough for the night. She needed enough for tomorrow. She needed enough to show the tribe she stood strong. When the last piece split, she wiped her forehead with the back of her arm. She lifted a log. Her fingers failed to close fully around it. She dropped it. She knelt and gathered smaller pieces first. She carried them back to the hall in 3 long, slow trips. By the time she set the final load down, the sky darkened again. The day moved fast in winter. Inside the hall, she set the logs near the fire pit. She crouched and fed the fire with small pieces. The flames grew. Warmth spread across her hands. She held them close. Her fingers burned with the shift from cold to heat. She bit her lip as pain surged through them. When she pulled them back, they trembled. She stood and looked around the hall. Patches of straw lay scattered. The walls held frost near the edges. The bed furs lay wrinkled from the night before. She reached down and smoothed them. Her hand rested on the spot where her husband had slept. She pulled her hand back fast. She turned away. She checked the tools. The bowstring frayed. The snare wire bent. The water bucket cracked. She placed the tools on a table near the entrance. She would repair them after tending the animals. She stepped outside again. Snow hit her face. She breathed out and walked to the small shed where food stores rested. She opened the door. Half the dried fish remained. A few sacks of barley. A jar of berries frozen at the top. Enough for some weeks, not enough for all winter. She felt her stomach tighten again. She looked toward the tree line. Forest paths grew thin and quiet in winter. But traps still caught hares. Berries still grew near sheltered rocks. She needed everything she could find. She stepped toward the path. Her breath shook. Her hand still hurt from chopping. She pushed the pain away. She walked into the forest. Snow reached higher near the trees. She pushed through. Her cloak caught on low branches. She moved them aside. The forest grew thick and dim. Her steps slowed. She listened for animals, for wolves, for threats. Winter forest sounds traveled far. She reached her trapline. Her first snare hung empty. Her second held a hare frozen stiff. She knelt and freed it. She whispered thanks as her mother taught her. She hung the hare at her belt. When she reached the third trap, something else waited. Tracks pressed deep in the snow. Wolf tracks, large, fresh. She followed them with her eyes. They circled her trapline. They pressed close to the path she walked each morning. She knelt and pressed her fingers into one track. It sank deep. The wolf weighed more than her. Maybe 2 wolves. Maybe more. She stood fast. Her breath grew sharp. Wolves in winter did not fear people when hunger grew strong. They watched from shadows. They waited for weakness. They watched widows more than men. She followed the tracks with her eyes again. They led deeper into the forest. They moved in wide circles around her land. They returned behind her hall. They crossed her fence line. She felt heat in her chest, not fear, anger. She walked fast back toward the open field. The cold cut, deeper now. The sky held a pale light. The wind rose again. When she reached the longhouse, she checked the fence. The same weak beam she saw in the morning now held claw marks, thin, shallow, but clear. Wolves tested her wall. She touched the marks with her finger. Snow blew across her face. She looked across the valley again. She saw a man watching from far off, the same one as earlier. He lowered his gaze again. He walked away. She whispered to herself, "They wait for weakness." She turned back toward the hall. She opened the door. Warm air left fast. She stepped inside and set the hare on the table. She grabbed spare wood and walked back to the fence. She pressed a plank against the weak beam. She hammered it into place with a stone. The sound echoed. Her breath formed clouds with each strike. Her arm ached. Her fingers stiffened again. She kept going until the plank held tight. Inside the hall, she placed the hare by the fire. She skinned it with slow movements. Her hands lost strength fast. She dropped the blade once. She picked it up again. She cleaned the meat. She placed it in a pot with barley. She added melted snow. She set the pot over the fire. She sat beside it and let warmth move across her legs. When the stew boiled, she ate in slow bites. Her chest eased with each mouthful. Her breath softened. She finished the bowl. She set it aside. She stared at the fire for a long moment. She remembered her husband's voice, his laugh, his steps on the floor, his breath at her side, the way he placed tools by the door each night, the way he cut wood fast and steady, the way he held the fence strong when storms rolled through. She closed her eyes. Her breath shook. But grief did not stop the night. The fire needed more wood. Animals needed checking. The tools needed repair. Wolves circled the ridge. She stood. She forced her legs steady. She moved to the door and stepped outside again. The sky held deeper darkness now. One by one, stars appeared. The cold pressed into her lungs. She walked the length of the fence again. She checked every corner. She listened for wolves, for men, for anything that threatened her hall. Her boots broke through ice near the back corner. Her breath left fast as she tried to pull her foot free. She shifted her weight. The ice cracked further. She dropped to her knee and pressed her weight backward. She freed her boot as the thin sheet broke. She sat in the snow for a long moment. cold pressed through her clothes. But she did not move. She stared at the far tree line. She thought of the weak beam, of wolf tracks, of her husband's missing steps beside hers, of the long days ahead. She whispered to herself, "I stand alone." Wind rushed across the valley. It lifted loose snow and wrapped it around her cloak. She stood slowly. She brushed ice from her boot. She walked back to the hall. She stepped inside and shut the door. She dropped the bar across it. She checked every shutter. She checked the vent above the fire. She sat at the table with the tools spread before her. She repaired the snare wire. She tightened the bowstring. She patched the bucket with a strip of leather. She kept working until her hands shook. When she finished, she placed everything in its proper place. She checked the fire one last time. The flames glowed steady. The hall warmed at last. She lay on her bed furs. Her breath eased. Her body ached. Her thoughts drifted. She stared at the ceiling beams. Snow pressed against the roof from outside. She listened to the night sounds. Wind, wood creaking, the faint call of an owl. Then she heard a sound she knew too well. A long, low howl, far off, but not far enough. Her eyes opened wide. Her breath stopped. She sat up. The wolves circled again. The howl faded into the valley, long and stretched thin over snow. She sat on her bed furs with her breath tight. The hall felt smaller than before. The walls seemed to lean inward. The fire's glow reached only part of the room. She rose from the bed and stepped to the center of the hall. She listened with full stillness. Another howl answered, shorter, close. She reached for her cloak and threw it around her shoulders. She grabbed her knife. She moved to the door, but did not open it. She pressed her ear to the wood. Her breath slowed. Her body stilled. Snow shifted outside, soft, careful. She whispered under her breath. 2, maybe 3. She waited. The night held its breath. Then paws pressed against the fence. Her animals moved with small cries. She stepped back from the door and grabbed a length of dried wood. She fed it into the fire. Flames grew higher. Warmth pushed outward. Wolves feared fire more than steel, but they tested fences before giving up. They waited for weak steps. They waited for human panic. They waited for the sound of a door opening. She did not open the door. She moved to the back wall. She pressed her hand against the logs. They held firm. She pressed her ear to the wall. The cold pushed into her skin. Through the wood, she heard the faint crunch of snow near the fence again. She whispered. They search for a way in. Her heart beat fast. She wanted to call for help. She wanted someone to stand outside with a spear. But no one heard her. No one watched her haul. Each family guarded its own. She clenched her jaw and steadied her breath. She walked to the table. She picked up the repaired snare wire. She tied one end to the table leg. She stretched it toward the door and hooked it low near the floor. If a wolf pushed through before she reached her weapon, it would slow its step. The fire crackled. The flames flickered across her face. She walked to the center of the hall again. She listened. No howls now. Only soft snow movement. The wolves circled. They waited. She sat near the fire. She sharpened her knife with slow strokes. She kept her movement steady. Her breath matched each pull of the blade. Her eyes stayed on the door. She whispered again, "They test me." She set the knife aside. She reached into her pouch and pulled out 3 small bone beads. She held them tight. Her mother had given them to her when she was young. Each bead held a small carved symbol. Her mother said they reminded her to breathe when fear pressed close. She closed her hand around them. Her breath slowed again. After several long moments, the snow outside fell quiet. No steps, no soft huffs. The wolves moved away. They did not leave the valley. She knew that. They drifted into the tree line. They waited for easier prey. But they marked her haul. They knew her scent now. They would return. She rose and walked to the door again. She pressed her ear to it. Silence. She stepped back. She sat by the fire and pulled the bone beads into her palm again. She whispered, "He would laugh at me." She pictured her husband kneeling by the fire, sharpening his own blade. He always joked about wolves. He always said winter wolves lost patience before hunger. He said the same thing every year. Let them circle, they break before we do. She closed her hand around the beads. He broke before I did. She lowered her head. Her breath shook once. Then she straightened again. She placed the beads on a small wooden shelf near the bed. She pulled her cloak tighter around her shoulders. She walked back to the tools. She arranged them in a neat line. She prepared for morning. She checked the pot again. The stew cooled, but still held heat. She ate a few more bites. Her body warmed. She washed the bowl with melted snow. She dried it with a strip of linen. Then she faced the task she avoided since dusk. She stepped to the corner where her husband's weapons hung. His spear leaned against the wall. His axe hung from a peg. His shield, cracked from last season's raid, rested near the floor. She touched the spear shaft. Her husband carved small marks along it to record each season of hunting. The last mark stayed unfinished. She ran her thumb over it. She lifted the spear. The weight surprised her. She braced it against the floor. She studied the point. It still held sharp. She set it down. She reached for the axe next. Its head felt cold against her fingers. She lifted it and tested the swing. Her arms strained. She lowered it. Her breath slowed again. She whispered, "I hold what was his." She placed the axe near the entry where she could reach it fast. She placed the spear beside it. She set the shield behind them. She stepped back and studied the placement. If wolves forced the door, she would reach for the spear first. If the spear failed, she would grab the axe. She pictured the movement. She timed it in her head. She practiced stepping forward. She practiced stepping back. She whispered, "I stand alone, but I stand prepared." She checked the door bar again. She tightened the hinges. She pushed against the wood. It held strong. She placed a small wooden wedge under the door to stop it from shifting in wind. She returned to the fire and sat again. Her shoulders ached. Her legs trembled. Her fingers throbbed. But she did not lie down yet. She watched the flames. She waited for sleep to reach her on its own. Hours passed. At last, she crawled back to the bed furs. She lay down and closed her eyes. The fire crackled. The wind pressed against the hall. No wolves called again. She slept. She woke to silence. No wind, no wolves, no movement outside, only stillness. She rose and rubbed her eyes. Her body hurt from yesterday's work. She stretched her arms. She checked the fire. Embers glowed. She added a small log. She stepped to the door and pressed her ear against it. She listened. Snow settled. The morning moved slow. She opened the door, a small space. Cold air swept in. She looked across the land. No tracks near the door. No prints around the fence. The wolves left small circles near the far end of the fence, but no new marks. She stepped outside. The cold pressed into her face. She pulled her cloak tight. She walked toward the shed and checked the food stores again. The sacks held firm. The dried fish stayed untouched. She returned to the fence and counted the animals. All stood safe. She exhaled. She moved to the woodpile. She added the logs she chopped yesterday. She counted them twice. Enough for 2 nights. She needed more before the next storm. She walked to the forest again. Snow reached her knees. She cut another trunk. She split it into pieces. She hauled them back. She worked in silence as the sun lifted pale light across the valley. She finished the second load and stepped inside the hall for warmth. She drank melted snow. She ate a strip of dried fish. She wiped her hands on a cloth. Then she saw movement at the far edge of her land. She walked to the door and watched. 2 women approached. Their cloaks blew in the wind. One held a basket. The other carried a small bundle. They walked slow across the snow. When they reached her fence, they stopped. She opened the door and stepped outside. The cold bit her face. She held her cloak close. The first woman spoke soft. "We bring small help." The widow blinked. "Help?" The woman nodded. "We bring wool, bread, 2 fish." The second woman stepped forward. "We bring these for you. Winter takes strength. We share some." The widow's mouth parted, but no words came. She stepped toward the fence. The women handed her the items. The wool felt thick and soft. The bread still warm. The fish wrapped tight. She looked at them both. "Why?" The first woman lowered her gaze. "We watched your smoke last night. We heard wolves. You held alone." The second nodded. "We no burden you carry. We give what we can." The widow swallowed. "Thank you." The first woman stepped back. "Stand strong. Winter tests all." The 2 turned and walked back toward their halls. Their steps left deep tracks in the snow. The widow watched them for a long moment. Their visit pressed warmth into her chest, far stronger than the fire. She carried the items inside and set them on the table. She touched the loaf of bread. Her breath steadied. Her strength rose with something deeper than food. Their visit told her something no one said aloud. She was not invisible. She stepped back outside. She faced the forest again. She studied the tree line. Wolves lived there. She squared her shoulders. Her husband once walked those same paths with steady steps. She walked them now. She whispered, "I face winter like he did." She stepped toward the forest. Her tracks pressed long lines in the fresh snow. The cold stung her eyes. Her breath made white clouds. She kept walking. She needed more traps. She needed more wood. She needed stronger ground. She reached the tree line and knelt near a fallen branch. She snapped it and shaped it into trap triggers. She placed new snares along the path. She tightened each wire. She tested the tension. She moved deeper into the forest. She reached a hidden spring. The water froze at the edges, but still moved under ice. She cleared snow from the edge. She lowered her hands into the cold and collected water into a wooden cup. She drank slowly. Footsteps sounded behind her. Her hand moved fast to her knife. She rose and turned. A man stepped through the trees. His cloak covered his face. His hands held no weapon. His breath came in strong puffs. She kept the knife raised. He lifted his hands in open air. "Peace." She narrowed her eyes. "You watch me each morning." He lowered his hood, his face older, his eyes tired. "I watch for wolves." She held the knife steady. "Wolves come for haul. You stand far and do nothing." He exhaled. "I watch for danger before it reaches you." She stepped closer. "Why?" He lowered his arms. "Your husband helped me dig my fence years ago. I owe him. I owe you." Her breath slowed. She lowered the knife, but did not sheath it. He pointed toward the ridge. "Wolves circle more this winter. Big pack. They watch halls. They test women first." She nodded. "I know." He stepped closer. "You stand strong, But pack grows bold. They hunt near river. They search for weak doors. She looked at the ground. They marked my fence. He nodded. I saw. I fix nothing without asking. But I watch. You hold pride of your husband. She sheathed the knife. I stand alone. He shook his head. You stand strong, not alone. She looked at him for a long moment. He added, I leave meat near ridge for wolves. They choose easier food first. It slows pack, gives you time. She inhaled sharply. You feed them? He nodded. Better than them breaking fences. Better than them killing animals. She looked toward the ridge. They come back? He nodded. Pack stays all winter. She tightened her cloak. Then I stand ready. He turned to leave. Call if hall breaks. I hear fast. She watched him walk away until trees hid him. She walked back toward her hall with slow steps. The valley stretched wide. Cold wrapped around her, but her breath stayed steady. The hall waited. The animals waited. The wolves waited. She whispered to herself, I face winter. I do not break. Morning light crept across the valley with a thin silver glow. Frost clung to the longhouse roof in a thick layer. The widow stepped outside with her cloak pulled close. Her breath carried small puffs into the cold air. The woodpile held steady. The animals stirred. The forest stood silent. Today held more work than the day before. Winter forced her to move without pause. She walked to the fence and checked each section. The patched beam held strong. No fresh claw marks. No disturbed snow. She whispered. They stayed away last night. Her voice sounded strange in the stillness, stronger than she expected. She turned toward the forest. She needed to check her traps before sun rose high. She grabbed her knife, spear, and a small leather pouch. She tightened her boots and stepped into the snow. Each step pressed deep. The cold bit into her legs. Her breath fogged the path behind her. She reached the hidden places where her snares waited. The first snare held nothing. The second held snow pressed flat by passing animals. The third held 2 hairs tangled together. She knelt and freed them with slow hands. She whispered a short thanks and placed them in her pouch. Then she stood still. Something pressed through the forest. Slow steps. Heavy. She tightened her grip on the spear. She listened with full stillness. The steps stopped, then shifted, then moved again. She took 1 step back. Her heart beat fast. She raised the spear. A figure stepped from behind a tree. The older man. She lowered the spear as he lifted an arm in greeting. Morning, she exhaled. You walk quiet. He nodded. Wolves pressed the ridge again. She glanced past him. How far? He pointed north. 3 near river, 2 near canyon. They search for scent. She tightened her jaw. They returned to hall. He shook his head. Not yet. They wait for hunger to push them close. She exhaled. Then I prepare before hunger grows. He nodded. You set more traps? She lifted her pouch. 2 hairs today. He looked at the ground. Use skins for stitching. Use meat for broth. Feed strength. She nodded. I keep moving. He walked beside her as she moved deeper into the forest. He stayed a few steps behind. He respected her space. He did not touch her traps. He kept watch while she worked. When they reached a small clearing, he stopped. This part holds danger at night. She looked at him. Why? He pointed at the snow. Tracks, big pack, many paws. She knelt and touched the snow. Deep prints, wide, fresh. Wolves crossed here before dawn. She rose. Then I stay away in dark. He nodded. Dark holds sharp teeth. She turned toward a fallen tree and pulled her knife. She cut 2 long branches for new trap triggers. Snow fell from the branches and covered her arms. She brushed it off and continued. The man watched her work with steady eyes. Your husband taught you traps. She paused. No, I learned alone. He looked surprised. Then you learned strong. She kept her focus on the wood. He spoke again. Your hall stands well. Fence holds. Fire smoke stays steady. You keep order. She looked at him. Why do you watch me? He paused. Your husband helped me many winters. He shared wood when storms took mine. He helped with roof. He shared food once when sickness took my strength. I owe him. I owe you. She lowered her gaze. No one else comes. He nodded. Some fear taking burden of widow. They think help ties them to your hall. They fear more work. You show strength. They wait for weakness before they offer. She narrowed her eyes. I offer none. He smiled faintly. I see that. She gathered the branches and placed them in her pouch. He pointed toward ridge. I go feed pack. They follow easy food before they follow you. She studied him for a moment. You risk life to help wolves? He shook his head. I risk life to keep them from yours. He turned and walked toward the ridge. Snow rose around his boots. His cloak dragged through frost. She watched him until he reached the tall pines. Then she turned toward her hall. She moved fast. She wanted to return before winds grew sharp again. Halfway through the path back, she stopped. 3 figures approached the center of the valley. Men, tall, broad, not from her tribe. She knelt behind a low drift and watched. They wore thick furs. Their axes hung at their sides. They walked with slow steps. Their breath showed no strain. She pressed her hand to the snow. She steadied her breath. The men stopped near a fence belonging to a hall 2 land plots away. They spoke with low voices. She heard only fragments. One of them pointed toward her longhouse. Her stomach tightened. Travelers? Traders? Or men who watched widows for weakness? She waited. The men walked again, slowly toward her hall. She kept low in the snow. She moved sideways until trees hid her. She followed them from a distance. They reached her fence. They looked toward her door. One touched the wood plank she fixed yesterday. The tallest spoke. She works alone. Another nodded. Storm left her with no man. The third smirked. Easy haul. Her hand tightened on her knife. She stepped closer behind a tree. She held her breath. The tallest man reached for the door bar. He pressed it with his thumb. He laughed. Weak. She moved fast now. She stepped out of the trees and into view. She held her knife raised and her posture steady. Move from my hall. The men turned. Their eyes widened for a moment, then narrowed. The tallest stepped forward. We bring talk. She kept her eyes on him. Talk from men who test doors? He shrugged. We test what stands alone. She took one step closer. My hall stands strong. He smiled a thin smile. Storm takes strength from woman. She stared without blinking. Winter takes strength from any who walk foolish. He studied her face. His smirk faded. You speak bold for widow. She raised her chin. I speak bold for my land. He looked toward his companions. They shifted but did not step forward. He spoke again. We walk valley for furs. We seek trade. We seek safe halls. She stepped closer. Safe. Halls welcome words, not tests. He looked at her knife. You think we fear small blade? She shook her head. You fear wolves. He blinked. What? She pointed toward the ridge. Pack circles valley. They smell new men. His companion shifted with unease. He narrowed his eyes. You speak truth? She nodded. They follow scent of strangers first. They watch them at night. The tallest man looked toward the ridge again. A faint howl drifted across the snow at that moment. Quick, sharp. He swallowed. We heard no talk of pack. She kept her voice steady. You walk far from home. You know little here. He glanced at the fence again. We seek trade, furs, food. We leave trouble. She lowered her knife, but did not sheath it. Trade waits in daylight, not at door of widow. He nodded once. We return when sun sits higher, with goods, with peace. She stared at him until he stepped back. His companions followed. They walked across the valley toward the center. She watched them until they disappeared behind the hill. She exhaled with slow control. She turned and walked into her hall. She closed the door. She dropped the bar. Her breath shook once, but she forced it still. She whispered, "Men test as wolves do." The fire burned low. She fed it new wood. She hung the hares by the window. She prepared broth again. As the pot warmed, she stepped to the weapons. She placed the spear beside the bed. She set the axe near the door. She checked the shield straps. She sat at the table and sharpened the knife again. Her hands steadied as she worked. Voices outside drifted faintly. Tribe members gathered near the center of the settlement. She heard fragments. Talk of men. Talk of travel. Talk of strangers walking the valley. She set the knife down and stood. She walked to the door and opened it a crack. People gathered in small groups. They spoke with concern. Their eyes darted toward the ridge, toward the path where the strangers walked earlier. One woman stepped toward her. "You saw them?" The widow nodded. "They came near my hall." The woman frowned. "They said they seek trade." The widow shook her head. "They test fences before trade." The woman swallowed. "Then tribe must watch them." The widow nodded. "Wolves watch them first." Voices lowered across the settlement. Concern grew sharp. Children pulled close to mothers. Men held axes near their belts. She stepped back inside her hall. She closed the door. The world outside her walls shifted again. Winter held danger long before snow melted. Wolves hunted. Strangers walked. Men watched widows for weakness. Every direction held threat, but her hall still stood. Her tools stayed sharp. Her traps held. Her strength held. She whispered, "Winter tests me. I stand." She sat near the fire again. She stirred the broth. She ate slow. She cleaned the bowl. She fixed a tear in her cloak. She sorted dried herbs. When the sun dropped low again, she stepped outside. She checked the fence one last time. She breathed the cold air. She listened for wolves. She heard none yet, but she knew they waited. She walked back inside and closed the door. During the deep part of evening, she heard snow shift near the forest. She heard men's voices far away. She heard a low growl echo from the ridge. Danger stood on all sides. She pulled her cloak around her shoulders. She sat with her back against the wall. She held her knife in one hand and her bone beads in the other. She whispered to the fire, "I hold my hall. I hold my life. I do not fall." The flames flickered. The wind shifted. Night settled across the valley once more. Dawn returned with a soft gray glow. Snow drifted from the roof in thin sheets. The widow stepped outside with slow steps. She had not slept long. She kept her knife near her chest through the night. Voices from the valley carried through the dark until late. Wolves howled near the ridge. The strangers spoke with tribe men before leaving for the far path. Every sound held weight. Every shift in the wind pressed tension against her ribs. She stepped into the snow and lifted her hood. Today demanded strength again. She walked toward the small shed beside her hall. She opened it and checked her tools. The axe held a sharp edge. The rope stayed tight. The wood stack stood tall, though it needed more. Winter never slowed. Winter waited for no grief, no fear, no doubt. She lifted the axe and walked toward the trees near her land. She scanned the valley first. The tribe moved slow outside their halls. Women carried water. Men stacked shields. Children stayed close to their mothers. They feel danger now. She stepped into the forest and searched for a small tree to cut. She touched the bark with one hand and listened. The forest stayed quiet. No heavy movement, no low growls, no voices. She lifted the axe, swung, and the blade cut the trunk with a clean sound. Snow dropped from the branches. She swung again and again. Her breath came out warm and steady. When the tree leaned, she stepped back and let it fall with a soft thud. She knelt and trimmed branches. She piled them near the trunk and cut a section for her hall's fire pit. As she worked, she heard slow footsteps behind her. She stood and turned fast, axe raised. The older man stood between two pines. He lifted his hand. "You cut wood early," she lowered the axe. "I work before danger moves." He stepped closer. "Strangers speak with tribe again." She narrowed her eyes. "Why return?" He shook his head. "Their steps slow. Their words hold weight of hunger. They hold furs. They seek halls with easy doors." She gripped the axe tighter. "They tested mine." He nodded. "I know. Word spreads." She looked away. "I hold my door." He stepped to the trunk and lifted one end. "I help you carry." She hesitated. "Why?" He looked at her with quiet eyes. "Your husband helped me many winters. I return the strength he gave. You work alone. I respect that. But respect does not forbid help." She watched him for a moment, then nodded once. "We carry." They lifted the trunk together and dragged it through the snow. Her breath grew heavy, but she refused to slow. He matched her pace. When they reached the hall, he set the trunk down near the shed. "You cut strong." She rested her hands on her knees. "Winter forces strength." He nodded. "Storm comes soon." She looked at the sky. "How soon?" "Tonight." She tightened her jaw. "Then I work fast." She turned back toward the forest. He followed. They walked without words for a while. The clearing held a stillness that felt different today. She cut another tree, smaller, easier to handle. He helped her lift the trunk. As they moved it, he spoke again. "You heard wolves last night." She nodded. "Close." He stopped. "They moved near your hall." She looked at him. "Why mine?" He studied the ground. "Your hall stands on old path. Wolves follow paths of ancestors. Men forget paths. Wolves do not." She took that in. "Then they walk through land before hall stood." He nodded. "Old paths hold strong memory." She walked toward her hall again. Snow creaked under their boots. The wind brushed their cloaks. She stopped halfway and looked toward the ridge. "You fed them." He nodded once. "I feed pack to keep blood from valley." She turned to him. "You risk life for that." He shrugged. "Life holds risk each day. I choose which risk meets me." She lifted the trunk again. He helped her set it on the pile. She brushed snow from her cloak. "I set new traps." He nodded. "I watch ridge for new signs." She looked at him. "You watch for me." He paused. "I watch valley. You stand in valley. I watch you too." She felt something shift in the air, but offered no reply. She walked toward the shed to gather her ropes and blades. He stepped back toward the forest. He disappeared behind the pines. She exhaled. "Storm tonight. Strangers close. Wolves near. Work holds no ending." She tightened her cloak and walked toward the traps she set along the slope. Snow fell in light flakes now. The air held a sharp scent that warned of hard winds coming. She reached her first trap and knelt. The snare held one small bird, barely enough for stew. She freed it and placed it in her pouch. She checked the next trap. Empty. The third trap held torn rope. She frowned and touched the ground. Claw marks, fresh, sharp, deep, Wolves. She stood slowly. She stepped back. Her grip tightened on her knife. She scanned the forest. No movement, no sound. Still, she felt eyes. She turned toward her hall and moved fast. Each step pressed deep in snow. Her breath rose in thick clouds. She kept her knife ready. The trees watched her. The wind carried nothing but cold. When she reached the open valley again, she eased her breath. Then she saw him. The tallest of the strangers walked near the center of the settlement with the other two behind him. They spoke with tribe elders. Their voices carried anger. Her tribe men watched with stiff shoulders. She slowed her steps. Something shifted in the settlement, a tension sharper than before. She watched the strangers speak with bold hands. She saw her tribe men shake their heads. She saw the strangers step closer. Too close. She moved nearer but stayed at the edge. A tribe elder raised his voice. "Your trade holds threat." The stranger pointed toward the valley. "We walk long path. We seek help. We seek goods. We seek shelter." The elder shook his head. "You test fences before you speak. That holds no peace." The tall stranger narrowed his eyes. "We test what stands weak." The elder took one step forward. "We stand strong." The stranger laughed. "Your valley hides fear of wolves." The elder nodded. "Fear and wisdom. Walk close." The stranger looked around. Fear grows in halls without men. Silence cut the air. 3 men turned their eyes toward her. She kept her posture firm. The stranger smirked. "Widow stands strong, yes?" "Widow chases us from her door." A few tribe members glanced her way. Some held concern, some held respect, some held unease. She lifted her chin. "I chase men who seek weakness." The stranger stepped closer. "Your strength interests us." She shook her head. "You seek halls without shields." He smiled. "What if we seek your hall?" She stepped forward now. Closer. "You step near my hall again, and wolves take your bones." He blinked. "You think wolves follow your call?" She kept her gaze locked on his. "They follow strangers before widows." One of his companions shifted back slightly. The tallest man frowned. The elder broke the tension. "Storm comes. Leave valley now if you hold trade. Return after storm passes. Or walk on." The stranger stared at the widow again, then at the tribe. "We return later, with goods." He stepped away. His companions followed. They walked toward the far path. The tribe watched them until they disappeared behind the hill. Snow fell heavier now. The widow stepped back. A woman approached her. "They seek trouble." The widow nodded. "They seek easy halls. They find none here." The woman sighed. "Storm will push them somewhere," the widow replied. "Wolves push them too," the woman shivered. "You hold more strength than most men here." The widow did not answer. She walked back toward her hall before more eyes turned her way. The snow thickened. Wind bit sharper. She secured the door with a heavy bar and checked the windows. She set 2 logs in the fire. The flames grew tall. She hung her cloak near the heat to dry. She knelt near the window and looked out. Snow blew sideways now. The sky dimmed, though sun still sat high. Storm pressed hard and fast. She moved through the hall. She checked the roof beams. She secured barrels. She pulled her bedding close to the fire. She placed dried fish and herbs within reach. She set her spear and axe near the door. Storm nights held danger for widows. Men traveled in storms. Beasts moved through storms. Thieves watched storms for cover. She sat near the fire and sharpened her knife again. Sparks flicked off the stone. Her mind stayed alert. The wind howled. Snow slammed the door. The hall shook. She stepped to the wall and pressed her hand against it. The timber held strong. Darkness grew. Wind rose. Snow thickened. She placed more wood in the fire. She wrapped a fur around her shoulders. Then she heard it. A soft thud at the door. Then another. Then a voice. "Hall woman. Open." Her body stiffened. She stepped closer to the door. "Who?" The voice answered. "Storm takes us. We seek warmth." She recognized the tone. The stranger's. Her pulse tightened. She held the knife with a firm grip. "You walk far from path," they replied. "Storm forced us here." She shook her head. "Storm hides tracks of men who seek halls to test." Silence. Then the tall man spoke again. "We freeze if you refuse." She stared at the door. She replied with sharp clarity. "Frost takes men who seek halls with harm." The man's voice rose. "We ask peace." She listened. No shuffle of fear in his voice. No weakness. Only demand. She knew this tone. Men who use storms as weapons. She stepped back from the door. "Leave my hall." He slammed a fist against the door. "Open." She grabbed her spear. "Leave." Another slam. "Open. Now." Her breath steadied. She held her spear at the ready. One more slam shook the door, but the bar held. The stranger snarled from outside. "Weak hall." She raised her voice. "Storm takes fools. Leave before wolves scent your fear." Silence followed, deep and long. Then a faint sound drifted through the storm. A howl, close, strong. The strangers froze outside. She heard their steps grow frantic. Another howl, louder. The strangers scrambled away from her door. Their footsteps vanished into the storm. She stood still. The hall shook. The wind screamed. But danger moved away. She placed the spear beside her and sat near the fire. Her breath slowed. Her pulse eased. She whispered to the flames. "Storm speaks for me." Hours passed. The storm raged without pause. The hall creaked under the weight of snow. She dozed for short moments, waking at each gust of wind. Her knife stayed in her hand through each breath. Near midnight, a soft knock sounded again. She lifted her spear fast. "Who?" a low voice answered. "Wind cuts my strength. I seek place to sit, only sit." It was the older man. She opened the bar and cracked the door. Snow blew inside. He stood with frost on his hair and cloak. His breath shook. She stepped aside. "Enter." He bowed his head and stepped inside. She closed the door tight. He stood near the fire with slow breaths. "You walk in storm." He nodded. "I followed pack. They smelled strangers. I kept them from your hall." She stared at him. "You walked ridge in this storm?" He nodded once. "Wolves move best when snow blinds men." She handed him a fur. He draped it over his shoulders. He sat on the floor near the fire. She sat across from him. "Danger grows." He nodded. "Strangers walk valley with hunger. Wolves grow bold. Tribe unsettles." She tightened her jaw. "My hall stands." He looked at her. "Your hall holds strength deeper than many." They sat in silence for a long moment. The storm roared around them. Snow hit the roof. The fire crackled between them. He closed his eyes for a breath. "Your husband would be proud." She did not speak. Her chest tightened. He continued. "You carry weight of 2. You do not fall." She looked at the fire. "No one carries for me." He opened his eyes. "You carry for yourself. That holds strong truth." She let out one slow breath. "Storm passes by morning." He nodded. "And danger follows after." She stood and added wood to the fire. "I face danger each day. Winter forces it." He leaned his head back against the wall. "You do not face it alone." She met his eyes. "Why speak this?" He closed his eyes again. "Strength seeks strength." She watched him until his breathing slowed. She sat beside the fire and held her knife on her lap. Snowlight flicked through the window. The wind eased. The hall warmed. Night pressed on. She whispered to herself, Winter does not break me. The storm passed before sunrise. Snow piled against the hall in thick drifts. Frost iced the windows in pale sheets. The widow rose before the first hint of light reached the valley. She moved slow, careful not to wake the older man who slept near the fire with a fur over his shoulders. His breath stayed steady. His hands rested near his staff. He had kept watch through the worst of the night until sleep forced his eyes closed. She stepped outside. Cold struck her face with sharp force. The valley held deep silence. The world looked buried. Snow reached her knees. The sky glowed faintly. No tracks near her door, no sign of strangers, no sign of wolves. She walked toward the fence and checked each beam. Snow pressed heavy, but the wood held. She brushed frost away and tightened a loose rope. Her fingers numbed fast. She pulled her cloak close. When she reached the ridge path, she saw tracks, heavy boots, deep impressions, 3 sets. The strangers walked through the storm. Their steps led toward the far valley. She knelt near the first track and touched the snow, fresh before dawn. They passed only hours ago, she whispered. They still walk near. She rose and followed their steps for a few paces. She scanned the ridge. No movement, no rustle, no voices. She turned back toward her hall. Work waited. She needed food for the day. She walked to the small shed and gathered dried fish, herbs, and a piece of smoked meat. She entered the hall again. The older man stirred at the sound of the door. He lifted his head. Morning? She nodded. Storm passed. He sat up slow. He looked at the window. Tracks? She nodded again. Strangers walked before dawn. He frowned. Far or near? She pointed outside. Ridge path. He rose to his feet and brushed frost from his cloak. They move fast. She set the pot over the fire. They seek a place to settle. He tightened his belt. They do not settle with peace. She stirred the pot. They smell weakness. He stepped closer to the heat. They find none in your hall. She did not reply. She handed him a small bowl when the broth warmed. Steam rose between them. He drank slow. He closed his eyes for a moment. Warm. Good. She ate too, quiet and focused. When they finished, he stood and lifted his staff. I follow tracks. You stay near hall. She frowned. You walk alone? He nodded. Wolves follow strangers. I keep them from valley. She watched him as he tied his cloak. Let danger meet you? He shook his head. I meet danger by choice. He walked toward the door. She stepped closer. You return? He looked at her with steady eyes. Yes. He opened the door and stepped into the cold. Snow swirled around his legs. He walked toward the ridge and vanished into the pines. She closed the door and placed the bar down. Her hall felt different now. Not empty, not silent, but changed. She cleaned the bowls and sharpened the blade again. She sorted dried herbs. She folded blankets. Then she heard voices outside. Many voices. She stepped to the door and cracked it, open. The tribe gathered near the center of the settlement. Men held axes. Women watched from the edges. Children stayed behind halls. She walked toward the crowd. Snow clung to her boots as she approached. A tribe elder raised his voice. Strangers return after storm. They walk valley. They ask for land. They ask for goods. A man spoke. They test fences. Another added. They watch halls with few hands. She stepped closer. The elder looked at her. You met them first. She nodded. They sought my hall in storm. Gasps rose from the crowd. A woman asked. They sought shelter? The widow shook her head. They sought weakness. The tribe murmured. The elder stepped closer. They forced your door? She replied. They struck it. They called for me to open. They did not freeze. The elder clenched his jaw. They hide plans. Another tribe man spoke. We send warriors to find them. The widow stepped forward. Warriors meet wolves first. The crowd stilled. The elder faced her. You saw wolves? She nodded. Tracks near traps. Fresh, large pack moves close. A man looked uneasy. Wolves drawn by storm. The widow replied. Drawn by strangers. Silence swept through the gathering. The elder spoke again. We send 2 men to watch ridge. We hold halls tight. We wait. The widow nodded. Wait holds more safety than chase. Some tribe members looked at her with surprise, some with respect. The elder lowered his voice. Your words carry truth today. She stepped back and walked toward her hall. She did not want eyes on her longer than needed. She had work to do. Inside the hall, she fixed her cloak, tightened her belt, gathered rope, and stepped out again. She walked toward her traps. Snow swallowed half the path. She used her spear as a guide. Her breath came sharp and steady. When she reached the first trap, she saw fresh snow stirred by paws. She knelt and pressed her hand to the ground. Wolves hunted here before sunrise. She checked the trap. Empty. The second trap held a broken trigger. She sighed with frustration and replaced it. The third trap held nothing but claw prints again. She stood and listened. Forest held stillness, but a heavy stillness, watchful, waiting. She moved along the slope until she reached a ridge that overlooked the valley. From here, she saw her hall, the tribe's halls, and the distant tree line. She stood in silence. Then she heard it, snow shifting behind her. She turned fast, spear lifted. The tall stranger stood 10 paces away. His beard held frost. His eyes stayed fixed on her. His 2 companions flanked him. She tightened her grip on the spear. You walk too close, he smiled faintly. You walk land alone. Brave for widow. She stepped back. Leave. He took a slow step forward. We speak before tribe meets us with blades. She raised her spear higher. Speak from distance. He nodded once. We walk long path. We lose 2 men last winter. We search land for a hall, a place to stay, a place strong. She did not lower her spear. Strong halls do not welcome tests. Shrugged. Men test what they want to keep. She stared. You want my hall? He smiled. We want your strength. She stepped closer now, eyes locked with his. Strength leaves when men enter with threat. He tilted his head. We seek leader. She shook her head. You seek control. He smirked. Call it what you wish. She pointed toward the ridge. Wolves follow you. He frowned. Wolves follow blood. She nodded. Your blood, your path, your steps. He narrowed his eyes. You speak as if wolves choose sides, she answered without pause. They choose hunger. A howl echoed across the ridge. The strangers stiffened. She lowered her voice. They stand near. He looked around fast. His companions gripped their axes. He stepped back. We return later, she answered. Do not return near my hall. He held her gaze. We return. He turned and moved through the trees. His companions followed. Their steps faded with the wind. She stood still until their tracks vanished into the forest. Danger grows with each hour. She turned toward the slope and moved back toward her hall. Snow pressed around her legs. The wind picked up again. The world held sharp edges. When she reached her hall, she secured the door and checked the windows. She placed her tools against the wall and sat near the fire. She held her hands close to the heat. She whispered, They seek my hall. They seek my life. She rested only for a moment. Work still waited. She gathered wool threads and fixed a tear in her cloak. She sorted dried herbs for broth. She fed the fire until it glowed bright. Late afternoon passed slow. The sky dimmed. Snow drifted lightly again. Then she heard it. Footsteps outside. Light. Careful. She stood with her knife ready and approached the door. A soft voice came through the wood. "It is me." She opened the door. The older man leaned against his staff. His cloak held snow. His face looked drawn with fatigue. She stepped aside. "Enter." He walked inside and closed the door behind him. He lowered his hood and brushed snow from his shoulders. "You follow tracks?" He nodded. "Far, into deep forest. They walk without rest. Wolves follow." She stepped closer. "You meet them?" He nodded again. "At distance. They hold fear now, their steps heavy. They know wolves press behind them." She poured a small cup of warm broth and handed it to him. He drank slow. "They seek your hall again." She felt her stomach tighten. "When?" He looked into the fire. "Before next dawn." She stared at the flames. Wolves follow strangers. Strangers follow halls. Danger moves in circles. He nodded. "But circle breaks when you stand strong." She sat across from him. "They force door tonight?" He shook his head. "Not in storm. Not in strength of tribe. They wait for dark. Soft dark. No storm. No wind." She looked toward the window. "Night holds silence tonight." He nodded. "Silence brings danger." She set her knife on the table and grabbed her spear. "I stand." He watched her. "You carry weight of warrior. Widow or not." She shook her head. "I carry weight of life." He set his cup down. "You do not face this fight alone." She looked at him. "Why stand with me?" He lifted his staff. "Strength seeks strength." She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she nodded once. "We prepare." They checked the door. They reinforced the bar with thick wood. They moved heavy crates against the wall. They prepared 2 blades, 1 spear, 1 axe. She brought a shield forward and placed it near the entrance. The older man tested the wood frame with his hands. Strong. She set a pot of water near the fire. Heat water. Blind eyes with steam if needed. He nodded. She wrapped furs around the windows to block view from outside. She checked each crack in the wall. She lowered the lights. The hall grew dim. The fire glowed low. Shadows moved slow across the floor. The older man stepped beside her. "They come soon," she nodded. "I wait." Night fell across the valley. Cold sharpened the air. Snow hushed sound. The world grew still. She held her spear and listened. Hours passed. Then she heard it. Snow crunch. Slow, careful. 3 sets. They approached the hall. She raised her spear. The older man lifted his staff. The stranger stopped near the door. Silence. Then a low voice. "Open. We speak." She stepped forward. "Leave," the tall man answered. "We seek place. Warmth. Safety," she replied. "Seek far." He placed a hand on the door. "We enter." She thrust her spear against the door. "Leave or wolves take you. Silence." Then a faint sound. A growl. Close. Another growl. Louder. Then a howl rippled across the valley. The strangers froze. She heard their breaths shift into panic. The older man whispered. "Pack waits for them." Footsteps scrambled. Fast. Wild. The strangers fled into the dark. The widow lowered her spear. The older man lowered his staff. She whispered, "Night stands with me." The strangers fled into the darkness, swallowed by snow and fear. The widow kept her spear raised long after their footsteps vanished. The older man stayed beside her with his staff held firm. The hall stayed silent except for the fire's soft crackle. She listened for the wolves. Only the wind answered. She lowered the spear. Her breath slowed. Her shoulders eased. The older man spoke first. They run without plan. She nodded. Storm broke them. He stepped toward the window and lifted the fur curtain. The night outside looked dense and still. No tracks showed in the faint moonlight. They do not return now. She nodded again. But danger holds memory. He dropped the curtain. They forget your strength. Wolves do not. She set the spear against the wall and sat by the fire. You think they leave valley? He lowered himself to the floor near her. They walk to river path. Wolves press behind them. If dawn finds them, they live. If not, she finished the thought. Winter takes them. He looked at her with steady eyes. You stood strong. She looked at the fire. I stood because I had no choice. He shook his head. You stood because your strength allows it. She did not answer. She felt heat on her hands. She watched the flames shift. After a long silence, he spoke again. Your husband would speak pride now. She closed her eyes for a moment. His voice gone. Pride gone. He leaned forward. Strength stays. She opened her eyes. Through storms, through fear, through wolves, through men. He nodded. Through widows. She exhaled with slow breath. I did not choose this life. He looked at her hands. But you hold it. She stood and walked to the window. Snow drifted outside. Light from the moon settled across the valley. They move far now. They do not touch my hall again. He rose. Danger knows you. Valley knows you. Tribe knows you. She turned to him. You speak truth? He nodded once. Widow without fear. Widow who stands alone. Widow who held off strangers at night. She stepped back toward the fire. I stand because I must. He stepped beside her. You stand because you choose to. She met his eyes. Why speak this? He looked at the fire. Winter holds few voices of truth. I give one. She sat again. You speak of wolves. You speak of men. You speak of life like you see all paths. He smiled faintly. Old age gathers sight. She lifted her bowl and placed broth inside. She handed it to him. Eat. Warm yourself. He accepted it and drank slow. They sat together in silence while fire warmed the hall. Hours passed. The wind softened. The snow eased. The valley calmed. Near dawn he stood. I go. She looked up. Where? He lifted his staff. Ridge. I follow pack. I keep them from tribe until sun holds sky. She rose. You walk without rest. He nodded. Rest after danger passes. She held his gaze. You return after dawn? He gave a slow nod. Yes. She stepped to the door and opened it. Cold air rushed in. Snow glowed silver. He stepped outside. He paused and spoke without turning. You hold hall strong. She answered. And you hold ridge strong. He walked into the snow until he faded in the pale light. She closed the door. She set the bar. Then she exhaled with slow control. The hall held quiet. She cleaned the bowls, fed the fire, adjusted the furs, and rested for one short moment with her back against the wall. Her eyes closed. Her breath slowed. She whispered, Winter breaks life or shapes life. She opened her eyes and rose again. Work waited. She stepped outside and checked the fence. Snow pressed high against it. She brushed frost away with her arm. She walked toward the shed and inspected the woodpile. Enough for 2 days. She needed more when wind softened. She walked toward the traps next. Snow reached her knees. She lifted her spear and used it as a guide. The forest stood dark and still. Ice cracked under her boots. When she reached the first trap, she stopped. Fresh tracks, 3 sets, not wolves, men. She knelt and touched the prints. Different boots, smaller group, lighter steps. They passed in the night. She muttered, more wanderers. She checked the trap, empty. She checked the next one, empty too. The third held a shred of fur. A fox escaped. She stood and scanned the forest. No voices, no movement. She turned toward her hall, snow crunching under her steps. When she reached the valley again, she saw tribemen walking from hall to hall. They carried shields. They spoke with tense voices. The elder spotted her and approached. Tracks near ridge, not strangers from storm. Others. She nodded. I saw them. He frowned. More seek valley. She looked toward the distant hills. Winter brings hungry feet. He sighed. We hold halls strong. We keep fires high. Children stay inside. She nodded. Danger walks when snow grows deep. The elder studied her face. Your name spreads now. Many speak your strength. She turned her head. I seek no praise. He nodded. Praise comes whether wanted or not. She walked away before more voices gathered. She preferred the quiet of her land. She entered her hall and closed the door. She sat by the fire and let warmth reach her hands. Her mind drifted to the older man walking along the ridge. Wolves followed strangers. Wolves watched valley. Wolves knew paths older than halls. She whispered to the fire. He walks danger with open eyes. Hours passed. She fed the fire. She boiled water. She repaired her boots. Snow fell light outside. The hall stayed quiet. Then footsteps sounded outside. Slow, even, familiar. She stood and opened the door. The older man returned. His cloak held frost. His breath came steady. She stepped aside. Enter. He walked in and closed the door. Wolves moved far. She nodded. Strangers? He leaned his staff against the wall. Gone to far river. Two-faced fall from cliff. One lives. She lowered her eyes. Storm took them. He shook his head. Wolves pressed them. She looked toward the window. Danger goes far. For now. He nodded. For now. He stepped closer to the fire and warmed his hands. Your tribe speaks your name this morning. She frowned. Why? He turned to her. Widow who holds hall when men do not. Widow who stands in storms. Widow who faces strangers with spear raised. She sat down. I act for life, not praise. He lowered himself beside her. Pride does not feed winter, but respect strengthens halls. She looked at him. I need none. He shook his head. You need truth. Truth stands with you. She stared into the fire. He sat in silence until he spoke again. Winter tests tribe. Winter tests widow. Winter tests wolves. All stand different. All need strength. She closed her eyes. I am tired. He nodded. Strength holds tired body. She rested for a moment. Then she opened her eyes again. You walk ridge many nights. He nodded. I walk until pack moves far. She folded her hands. You risk too much. He met her gaze. Life without purpose holds risk too. She studied him. Purpose holds your steps? He nodded. Purpose guides old bones. She breathed out slow. You hold valley safe. He looked at her. You hold hall strong. She turned back to the fire. We stand until winter ends. He nodded. We stand. Snow drifted outside. Wind brushed against the walls. The valley settled into slow calm. She stood and gathered herbs and dried fish. Eat. He accepted the bowl. They ate in silence. When they finished, he stood and lifted his staff. I walk to tribe hall. They seek my voice. She nodded. Return after. He paused at the door. I return. He stepped outside. She watched him walk through the snow. When he vanished, she stepped back inside and closed the door. Her hall held warmth. It held order. It held life shaped by storms and danger. It held the truth of a widow who faced winter without fear. She sat near the fire again. Night approached with slow steps, but no fear pressed her chest now. She held strength in her hands. She held knowledge in her mind. She held her hall with firm resolve. She whispered, I endure. The fire glowed. Snow drifted against the wall. The valley quieted. Her story would not echo in sagas. Skalds would not carve her name, but her strength shaped her land. Her choices guarded her hall. Her courage set a path for others. Viking widows lived lives you would not survive for a week, yet she lived far longer. She stood through storms. She faced men. She fought wolves. She carried grief. She carried life. And winter never broke her. Thank you for staying with her story until the final breath of winter passed. You stood beside her hall. You watched storms rise. You watched strangers push close. You watched strength form in silence. If you enjoyed this quiet walk through her life, you are welcome to return for more Viking nights. The next story waits with new footsteps, new danger, and new truth. I leave a small free guide for you in the next video. Rest now. Breathe slow. Let the fire fade. Let the night settle soft around you.